Anyway, so I was talking about methodics or methodology of language teaching, and the whole history of English language teaching or applied linguistics. If you look at somehow it started with applied linguistics, as you remember, that started with English language teaching. So somewhere in the 1940s. So we know that brief history of applied linguistics. I think I discussed that part in the class, and as well as I shared an article with you. If you remember, you must have read that article. So that brief history of applied linguistics we discussed, and also you must have read. Okay, so and from this book, the textbook, I recommended you in the class, the Guy Cook Applied Linguistics, and there in the chapter 4. So please start reading chapter 4. Chapter 4. That's the English language teaching. That's the chapter. So and there itself, you will get to know about a little bit about English language teaching, and also different kind of methods or approaches or techniques which are employed at the time of teaching English, or for that matter second language. So please start reading chapter 4. And so today, mainly in this class, I'll be talking about English language teaching, and what are the methods, let's say, what are the methods of language teaching or second language teaching, and primarily focusing on grammar translation methods. Grammar translation methods. So there are many methods of language teaching, and so grammar translation method, one of the classical or oldest method of language teaching. You see, so mainly today I'll be talking about grammar translation method, and as I told you, that it's not only grammar translation method in the history of language teaching or second language teaching. So you must have heard about direct method, audiolingual method, communicative approach to language teaching or communicative method of language teaching, computer assisted language learning. So what is called CAL, CALL, CAL, or situational method. Even this person, Krashen, I was talking about Krashen last time. He emphasizing on reading method now, reading method. So reading method, situational method, community language learning method, the natural approach, total physical response. So there are many methods of language teaching, you see. So 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 that's what. So we'll be discussing some of these methods in this course, applied linguistics, and and uh, and also some of the methods or approaches will be discussed in the class. And if because of the time constraint, so what I will do, instead of discussing those things, so I'll briefly talk about what those methods, but you will have to make a short presentations. So I'll be providing you some articles and some maybe chapters some some selected books. So you will have to present those things. Okay. So these are different types of methods I mentioned, and there are other types of methods are also being discussed in the literature. Okay. So now talking about, so to say, that's what I was telling you, that English language teaching, and it's a second language teaching or second language learning. These are some kind of equivalent terms, it is being used. Or later on, after 1970s, 70s or 80s, many people started using the term second language acquisition also. Not only second language teaching, on second language acquisition also. So SLA, second language acquisition, So that's the equivalent term. And why second language acquisition? I think we have already discussed that, especially people following this, mainly the generative tradition, the mentalist tradition, so they do not make that kind of distinction between acquisition versus learning, So that is one of the reason, and so that's what. So in this, so you'll have lots of literature related to second language acquisition, and related to that, teaching English as a foreign language, you'll get lots of literature related to that, teaching English as a foreign language, and the TEFL. But talking about India's case, as we have already discussed, in India, English is not a foreign language. You see, English is an official language in India. And so the status of English is different, if you talk about the expanding circles, in expanding circles, maybe English is considered to be a foreign language, but in India, so TEFL, what we are talking about, it's not necessarily the case. And we have also discussed that in English, Indian English, and for many Indians, English has become kind of native language or mother tongues for many people, you see. And so it's a little bit complicated, It's not simple the way we look at it, English as a foreign language. Even if you look at from the colonial perspective, it's not necessarily so. So in India's case, now if you look at in India, English is taught in different state, and not only different state, but also the union territories. So in the schools, even in the primary schools, if you're talking about, English is taught. Now, and even the primary school, if you try to make a distinction between those primary schools, you have those private schools and those, that's a government sponsored school. So English is also taught in those private schools, and as well as those, private schools. So in Delhi, if you look at those case, in Delhi, DPS, so very prestigious, and also depending on which board you come from, whether it is CBSC or ICCSC or all that kind of state board. If you are from West Bengal, then secondary education board, then higher secondary education board, and all states have different kind of boards. I'm talking about school level. So what is happening? So you have a different kind of syllabus for teaching, so to say, the English language here. And this syllabus is not universal or unique, let's say, to some extent. It is not similar. So from one board to another board, if you just look at and compare, so the kind of syllabus or curriculum, you will see that there is a huge differences, in the curriculum, and so now what is happening is that it's a really complicated task, and it is a very complicated task, especially if you're introducing, or English is already been introduced in the school curriculum. So it's really complicated task, and we had seen that English is differently taught as a second language in India. Second language, you're talking about second language, not necessarily foreign language, you see. And India's talking about the case, Indian classes mainly, Indian classes have their own problems. And if you look at try to compare the rural setting, try to compare the urban setting, DPS versus the government schools, the private schools, so you'll see that there are lots of problems. The school have their own problems, and even the teaching methodology, the kind of teaching methodology which is being employed, then you have a different kind of problems. Even the teachers, at times the teachers, they're teaching English, they themselves, they do not know English. I can tell you, in many cases, many examples are there. So I'll tell you, once I was conducting a survey back in Bengal, and especially in the primary school, visiting different primary schools, looking at especially the mother tongue case, and I'll tell you, and it is pretty shocking, and it's not only in Bengal, in different places you will see that kind of situation, is that so there are more than 50 students in a class, and the students, most students, they have to carry some sack to sit, and so otherwise they sit simply on the grasses or there are no place to sit basically, and mostly students, they come for this midday meal, and midday meal is provided because of this government initiative, and so pretty kind of horrid kind of situation in different places. So it's not only Bengal, maybe even if you visit Bihar and UP, different places in the rural setting, even in MP also, you'll see that same kind of scenario. And even after consuming or having those midday meal, we see in the newspaper that some students, either they're hospitalized or something happened to them, you see. So that kind of situation. And even we had seen that talking about the teachers, so talking about the teachers and their competency level, uh, it's also questionable, you see. And I'm not talking about the school teachers, they are not competent. Even there are many college teachers or university teachers, they are also not competent, the subject they are teaching. But in general, if you look at it, so there is a problem. So there are different kind of problem. And if you look at the classes, Indian classes, they have their own problem. Teaching methodology, curriculum have different kind of problems. And especially in India's case, whether it's a metropolitan city or it's a urban setting or semi-urban setting, you see that the classes are mainly multilingual. Multilingual in the sense, so the teacher, he speaks a different language, and the children, they speak different languages, and not only that, in the ground level, language problems are there, and class differences. You will also find that kind of class differences. And not only class difference in Indian setting, we had also seen the caste difference also, and it is being reported that many Dalit children, they are being regularly, when they are coming to the school authority or some teachers, they are making them, to sweep or to do some that kind of manual or scavenging kind of work. And at times it's a very good effort if it is a group activity, if all the children are being involved. But if at times what happened, only some people are being targeted, so we had seen different kind of problems in Indian setting, you see. So the class difference, the caste difference, and so you cannot escape, from that kind of ground reality, what is happening, you see. So, and also in the policy level also. So policy level, there are different kind of problems, whether the state has adopted 3-language formula, and even the concept of 3-language formula is also confusing, So so there are many problems. So anyway, so we're not going into that kind of practical problem, but if you do field work, then you get to know, because why I'm saying or sharing with you with all these things, because what is being said or prescribed in principle, the kind of constitutional rights which are there or enshrined in our constitution, or in the policy level, but in ground level, these are different things are happening, you see. So so that's what let's say in future, please, whichever the area you come from, and maybe you can visit to those schools or maybe colleges and try to see that what is happening, you see, and try to look at things, from your own perspective, not the perspective, the kind of deductive perspective. I mean to say that the kind of which is already there in your mind, and try to just prove the point, So try to see things from a different lens, from different kind of perspective, you see. So anyway, so there are different methods of language teaching, and what we have understood so far is that there is no single method that is considered to be very, very effective and accepted by all. So I was talking about various methods, whether it's a grammar translation method, it's a direct method, audiolingual method, communicative approach to language teaching, or computer assisted language learning, reading method, situational method, communicative community language learning, the natural approach, the total physical response. So there are many methods of language teaching. So you can't say that it is the only method. So there is no single method that is considered effective and accepted by all. So what is happening is that, and always this question is asked to me in many places and many seminar and conferences also, that, sir, in your understanding, what is the best method of language teaching, and I cannot tell you that what is the best method of language teaching, and so if you are, let's say, want to be a very good teacher, you have to employ, maybe at times, depending on the situation, on the ground reality, maybe grammar translation method is good, but not only grammar translation method, you may need to combine with communicative method of language teaching. And what is the aim and objective of the learners, that has to be looked at as well. So whether are you trying to develop your oral proficiency or written proficiency, so it depends on, you remember, last time we were talking about objectives of language learning or objectives of language teaching, and mainly objectives of language learning. So people may have different kind of objectives of language learning. Someone wants to work somewhere as in a call center, and so his main priority is to develop that kind of accent, pronunciation aspect, speaking thing, and not necessarily the written aspect, So for that, you need to make your whatever the kind of method or the plan, you need to plan accordingly so that the person can, speak for a certain period of time, within 2 months or 3 months or maybe 6 months or 1 year, he could speak proficiently, So it depends on. So what I'm saying is that though we have different methods of language teaching, many methods of language teaching, so there is no guaranteed one method that this is good or this is bad. Okay, so every methods, for that matter, it has its own shortcomings and the kind of limitations or drawbacks. Okay, so today, mainly, as I already told you that in this class, I'll be talking about grammar translation method, you see. And now, so the method or methodology, and so why we need method or the kind of teaching methodology, why do we need, and let's say you are a researcher doing research in whatever the topic, and whichever the language. So if you have a kind of methodology, so what happens is that you are very systematic and scientific in your approach, and even teaching methodology. If you have some kind of methodology in your mind, even if you follow certain methods, that means you are very systematic and scientific way you are teaching that particular language, So what is this method? So method is basically, it's a process of planning, selection and grading language materials and items, techniques of teaching. So it's a kind of process of planning, you need to plan accordingly. You need to select things, what are the things to be taught, what are the things not to be taught, and also the assessment part also comes into picture, and techniques of teaching also. So this is what is method. So Anthony says that when describing method and techniques, it's a particular trick, strategy or contrivance, that is skill, used to accomplish an immediate objective. So the kind of immediate objective, it's a particular trick, and every teacher, for that matter, has to employ certain particular kind of trick for that matter. You see, and so Mackey, W.F. Mackey, M-A-C-K-E-Y, Mackey says that when talks about method, a method must include 4 things. What are those 4 things? Selection of linguistic material, so gradation of linguistic material, techniques of presentation, and practice by people. So emphasizing on 4 things that when you're talking about method. So regarding this, really interesting if you look at this whole method, techniques and approach, in let's say last 20 or 25 minutes, I was talking about method, and side by side, I must be using the word techniques and approach. And so to some extent, is there any kind of distinction, kind of differentiation between this approach, method, and techniques? And so there is a kind of distinction is being made. So before that, if you would like to say something what is in your understanding, layman's understanding, so do you see any kind of difference between approach, method, and techniques? You maybe just simply can comment, then I'll get back to that part. Okay. Do you see any differentiation, distinction between approach, method, and techniques in your understanding, in the layman's term?
So the approach is basically, sir, what I understand by the term is approach is something which comes before the method and technique, like comes before the execution, like what kind of approach I should follow, whether it should be an optimistic approach or a negative approach. And then I follow the methods, and then I observe my techniques to actually executing the work. Okay. So this is a very layman's English. That's what I understand by the term, sir.
Okay, Sanchita. Good. It's intelligent guess, Sanchita. Very good. Yeah, you're right to some extent. I'll go into the detail. Before I go and say about this, anyone would like to say something, share with us?
So probably approach has to be decided before selecting the method, and method can be selected after deciding the approach. So probably this is one of the differences between approach and method.
Okay, Pratiti. Almost Sanchita and Pratiti, you have said almost the same thing. Okay. Anyone would like to say something? What is in your understanding, approach, method, and techniques? Okay. Anyway, so see, you are right, both of you, Pratiti and Sanchita. So the kind of arrangement we are talking about, approach, method, and techniques, So it's basically the arrangement is basically hierarchical. So the organizational key is that techniques carry out a method which is consistent with an approach. Try to understand the term. So techniques carry out a method which is consistent with an approach. So if you look at the kind of hierarchical structure, it's basically the approach which is the broad level, and method is then the next level, and the technique is, let's say, again in the lower level to some extent, So Anthony says that the organizational key is that techniques carry out a method which is consistent with an approach. Okay, with an approach. And what is approach? And this is what Anthony, 1963, says that. So an approach is a set of correlative assumptions dealing with the nature of language teaching and learning. An approach is axiomatic. It describes the nature of the subject matter to be taught. Okay, so approach is axiomatic. It describes the nature of the subject matter to be taught. So on the other hand, what is method? Method is an overall plan for the orderly presentation of language material, no part of which contradicts and all of which is based upon the selected approach. And a method is procedural, where approach is axiomatic. So axiomatic means, when you talk about axiomatic, it's a kind of self-evident, it unquestionable. So following certain method, whether it is the behavioral approach for that matter, you see. So for behavioral approach, following the behavioral approach, the kind of theory we are talking about. So try to understand that approach is a higher level term, and some kind of philosophical or psychological understanding we do have which is associated with approach. So the kind of theory for that matter, I can say. So mainly, let's say all those behavioral approach, if you look at the behavioral approach, and behavioral approach dominated the language teaching, and still it is dominating in different places, let's say, especially in language teaching. So why is that? That kind of mindset we do have, that language is considered to be a set of behavior, and as if like it can be language can be trained easily, the way we train other people, let's say. So language, as if like even it can be trained, and so as a result, the whole practice of drilling, the whole practice of memorization, retrieval, from the memory and all, and so it has been going on. So why is this so? Because we have that kind of theoretical understanding, the kind of approach we have in mind. So let's say mainly behavioral approach of language teaching for that matter. So in order to carry out the behavioral approach, let's say, or the kind of theory which are proposed by behaviorists in early 1930s, or later on as well. So you are carrying out certain methods of language teaching. Okay, so method is an overall plan for the orderly representation of language material, no part of which contradicts, and all of which is based upon the selected approach. So selected approach, the theoretical understanding, approach. An approach is axiomatic, method is procedural. So method is procedure. There are certain process has to be followed. Within one approach, there can be many methods. Try to understand that. Within one approach, there can be many methods. So let's say behavioral or approach we have in our mind. So to fulfill the behavioral approach, let's say you are employing different methods. You see. So on the other hand, technique. If you're talking about technique is mainly that's a technique. Tricks. Technique is implementational. So Anthony says that technique is implementational, that which actually takes place in classroom. So it's actually taking place in classroom. It's a particular trick, stratagem or contrivance used to accomplish an immediate objective. So immediate objective, whichever the immediate objective, techniques must be consistent with the method and therefore in harmony with an approach as well. So the techniques, whatever the techniques you're employing, so it must be consistent with the method and therefore in harmony with an approach as well. Okay, so let's say you have taken up this issue of communicative, following this communicative method of language teaching. And even the word communicative method or communicative approaches, both are used. But if you look at the communicative method or communicative approach of language teaching, it's mainly heavily influenced by the kind of sociolinguistic theory we are talking about, the sociolinguistic theory which were developed later in 1970s, whether you talk about Delheims and others, you see. And so communicative method of language teaching will mainly look at language uses for that matter, and also the communication part, which and given too much importance to mainly the oral communication for that matter, speaking and all, and language uses, not the competence thing, what in the generative approach we had looked at, and so that's what I'm saying, so this is really interesting, and a behavioral approach so as a result, following the behavioral approach, many people, they may employ different kind of methods for that matter. Okay, so this is so you are right, both Pratiti and I think Sanchita So when you are talking about the approach, method, and techniques in layman's term, so we had seen that the arrangement is hierarchical. So the organizational key is that techniques carry out a method which is consistent with an approach. Okay, so these are basically related also. It's not like that. So and consistent with one another. Okay, so and now today, as I told you that I'll be talking about grammar translation method, or GTM. And this is there are different names of this method, grammar translation method, or GTM. So it's also called classical method. Classical method, the oldest method of language teaching. And so why it is classical method? Why it is oldest method? Because somewhere when this second language teaching started, and our second language and foreign language teaching started, so so people adopted grammar translation method, you see. And if you look at the history of grammar translation method, it dominated whole Europe, and Europe, USA, and also other parts of the colonialized world, for that matter. It dominated, and wherever this foreign language teaching were going on. So somewhere around 1840s to 1940s, if you look at, so this grammar translation method dominated in 1940s, and later on somehow, so the whole generative approach, when it came into picture, it questioned questioned whole behaviorist understanding of language. And not only that, and when people started working on mainly in advanced sociolinguistics and all, Delheims, Lavov, and many other people, and there itself, if you look at, that communicative method of language teaching, where later on it was developed, and so if we talk about this grammar translation method, the initial purpose of this method was somehow how to read classical text. So I said that classical method. So how to read classical text, understanding the fundamentals of grammar and translation, and gaining insights into some important foreign influences classical languages have had on development of other European or Indian languages, you see. So so mainly it's somewhere around you need to how to read classical text, so that the text of English language, or text of Italian language, or text of Russian language, or text of Sanskrit, for that matter. And many people, let's say, they learned English, for that matter, in order to understand Shakespeare, or let's say they want to enjoy Dante in Italian. Many people, they must have learned Italian, or they want to enjoy Pushkin and his work, so they must have learned Russian, So, and mainly since the 19th century Europe, people started, and this is the time also, if you look at, the 19th century Europe, people studied many classical languages, whether the classical languages Latin or Greek, but in India's case, it is Sanskrit. And the modern language teaching followed, so whichever the language teaching you are talking about, it followed grammar translation method. And this grammar translation method, what happened, it brought students in contact with many great national civilization and their literatures. And the literature, as I already mentioned, so Shakespeare for English, Dante for Italian, Pushkin for Russian. And for that matter, let's say, many people must have learned Bangla also in order to understand Rabindranath Tagore, for that matter. I know many people, they do not know, but in order to understand Rabindranath Tagore and his works and all, many people on purpose, they try to learn Bangla, for that matter, you see. So, and so the grammar translation method, somehow, as I already told you, it's the oldest method of language teaching, and also it's called classical method of language teaching. And it's mainly, it was a kind of scholarship, or offspring of German scholarship. So So the people who kind of employed this method, especially in the second language teaching, is mainly the German scholars, and so all these German scholars, whether it's Karl Plotz, Seiden, Stacker, John Meidinger, and this the whole German domination you will find in grammar translation method, and this method, especially in the USA, grammar translation method was known by Prussian method, Prussian, Prussian, Prussian method in the USA. And it started in 1845, and this is the book by Kelly. It was published, the Caesarean or the Prussian method of teaching the elements of the Latin language. And the Latin language, you see, Latin was being taught that time, and you'll see that all the classical languages I am talking about, so how to learn those classical languages for that matter, and so the Prussian method. So German scholarship, so it is the contribution of the German scholarship, and if you are talking about this grammar translation method. So what are the objectives of grammar translation method? So the main objectives of grammar translation method, if you look at, so to build the kind of capacity to translate, so you can translate, from one language to another language, and mainly, let's say, the target language, and vice versa, from this to that, you see. And so building capacity to translate is one of the foremost objectives of this approach or method. So the most fundamental reason for learning the language is to give learners access to literature in the target language. So they are trying to give access to literature in the target language and develop their language faculty for an understanding of foreign language, and to build in them the kinds of grammar, reading, vocabulary, translation skills necessary to read and pass some kind of written test, and also some kind of written test. You see, so they are not basically looking at the oral proficiency of the learners. Mainly, even there is a test going on. It's basically the written test, and how do they study? So see, if you mainly in India, many people are trained by this method, grammar translation method. So they will employ study of parts of speech as well as the syntax in detail. And students are rarely called upon to speak the language in any communicative fashion. The students are rarely called upon to speak the language. So there are many people who are trained in grammar translation method. They may write, very good English or whichever the second language for that matter. But if you are talking about to speak, it's very difficult for them to speak or communicate in that particular language. The people who are trained in grammar translation method. And we had also seen that there are many Irish writers, Gaelic writers, and who could read and write really good English, but when it comes to speaking, many Russians for that matter, many Russians are very good at writing, many Indian for that matter, very good at writing or reading, especially comprehension if you're talking about, but when it comes to speaking, they perform really bad, and so one of the oldest method of language teaching, and though it is one of the oldest method of language teaching, and after 1940s, as I told you that after the emergence of generative tradition, the generative grammar, when it came into picture, the whole approach were being questioned by the generativist, and so. But still, nowadays, this method, old method, still it resurfaces in a variety of ways from time to time. It still comes. And even if you look at in India and different third world countries and many places, this method is still being employed. So why is it? Why is it so? So I'll talk about that aspect in the later part of the class, let's say. And so why is it so? That why grammar translation method? So why is it still kind of resurfaces in different third world countries and in different places, not only in third world countries, in different places in the world, and many people for that matter who are being trained in grammar translation method, they also say that it is one of the best method of language teaching. There are many people who are being trained, they also say that it's one of the best methods of language teaching, you see. So you can have your own understanding. So whether it's one of the best, or you don't think that it's one of the best methods of language teaching, because there are many drawbacks, shortcomings of these methods we do have. Okay, so I'll discuss those drawbacks and shortcomings, and also you can relate to your own language teaching experience, whichever the second language are being taught to you in your school days or college days. You can also kind of relate to that part, you see. So now grammar translation method, if you just try to understand this whole thing, grammar translation, it's basically translating the grammar of that particular language, and the kind of explanation were given through our mother tongue or the contact language, not necessarily the mother tongue, but through the contact language, you see. So grammar rules were explained to the students in their own language. So that own language, it could be the mother tongue, it could be the known language. Let's say in JNU, what is happening? Let's say the Korean. Korean is being taught to many students here, and Korean, Japanese, Chinese, So we can't see that the mother tongue is being. Teachers are explaining the rules in mother tongue, because in India, if you talk about mother tongue, so especially in JNU, in the Korean department, we see that many students, they come from Bihar, from UP, from, let's say, other parts of the India, and also from different countries for that matter. We have students coming from other parts. You see, even many countries, whether it's Nepal, Bhutan, Sri Lanka, and all. So what is our so to say the contact language or the known language? So students, mainly the teachers are explaining the rules in English to teach the target language. The target language, whether it's Korean, Russian, Chinese, or Japanese, and all. So I'm saying, let's say, if they are following the grammar translation method. Many teachers in JNU, they do not follow the grammar translation methods. Maybe they are following communicative method of language teaching, and not only one method. Maybe they are also mixing up. Okay, so the one of the things of grammar translation method, that grammatical rules were explained to the students or to the learners in their own language. So the concept of own language, as I already told you, that it could be mother tongue, it could be the known language. Known language, it could be any known language for that matter. Okay, it could be Hindi, it could be Bangla, and so vocabulary list were learned with translation equivalents. So vocabulary list, if you remember that some vocabulary, some words are given with translation equivalents. So let's say English and mother, the word mother, and let's say what is the equivalent of mother. So they'll try to give in that contact language or the known language. So mother, let's say ma, or whichever for that matter, father, mata, ma, mataji, father, pita, pitaji, baba, let's in Bangla, So you'll say that. So vocabulary list were learned with translation equivalents. Sentences are constructed from rules introduced in the classrooms from that limited vocabulary. So the kind of limited vocabulary they have introduced, and on the basis of that, students will be asked to make kind of sentences. You see, and second language was seen always through the students' first language. So the second language, whichever the target language we are talking about, let's say in this case English. So it is seen through the students' first language. So first language, let's see, if you're a Bangla speaker, so you are looking at English from Bengalese that point of view. The second language were always seen from students' first language, because even the rules are also explained in that manner, so this is where there were no emphasis on the development of the fluent speech. As I already told you, the fluent speech that especially the oral part we're talking about, there is no emphasis given on, and it is understood that it's better to get things right slowly than say things fast and effectively. So for them, you see, first you try to learn the grammar of the language, and maybe slowly and gradually you can speak the language. That is that kind of understanding the people they have, you see. And how they do measure the success, whether you are a bad learner or good learner and all. So success is measured in terms of accurate use of grammar. So accurate use of grammar and vocabulary rather than effective communication. So they are not looking at the communication part. Only somehow if you are using correct grammar and vocabulary for that matter, so you are passing that kind of test, and we had seen that many people out of 100 they're getting let's say 90 or more than 90. So maybe first class, and maybe and after that, if you talk about the communication part, maybe they are not able to communicate effectively, you see. So that's what, so how they're measuring the success on the basis of accurate use of grammar, and even the kind of test being conducted. If you look at the test, all this test, so whether you are good and bad, whether you will fail or pass, it's basically accurate use of grammar. And depending on some kind of vocabulary test, at times they do all this antonyms, synonyms, and how much, how far know about the language and all, so all that kind of things they test, you see. So so the kind of key features, I think it is by now it is being understood to you that the key features of this, so to say, the grammar translation method. So just briefly, I will tell you what are the key features or the characteristics of grammar translation method. I think it is understood, but briefly, I'll just once again briefly summarize. So if you must have understood that classes are taught in the mother tongue and with little active use of the target language. So you will hardly see that the target language is being used by the teacher. So classes are taught also in the mother tongue. So you will see that, let's say in Hindi belt, English is taught most of the time. The teacher is speaking in Hindi. If it is in Bengal, most of the time the teacher is teaching English in Bangla. Maybe even in Syria or other countries, the same thing it will happen. In Malayalam also, let's say in Kerala, maybe this is also happening, you see. So classes are taught in the mother tongue or whatever the language with little or active use of the target language. Hardly the teachers, they use the target language, okay. And the much of the vocabulary, the kind of words I was talking about, and this vocabulary are taught as a kind of list of isolated words. So the words are not in a particular kind of context, So words are taught as a kind of list of isolated words. So it's something like, names of fruits, names of vegetables, color terminology. Mostly teachers, they work with students with patterns and drills. So there are lots of repetition, the practice. So the students will give you a list of, the teacher will give you a list of, let's say, words, whether 50 words or 100 words, and will tell you that, yes, memorize these words and come in the next class. So whether you are not, whether able to memorize those words along with the meaning and all. And so the kind of drills, so keep on repeating those things, and long elaborate kind of explanations of the intricacies of the grammar are given. So the grammatical rules are explained, and lessons are prepared with such as parts of a speech. Talk about the parts of a speech, all those, especially in English, as you know, that 8 parts of a speech, they talk about the noun, verb, adjective, adverb, preposition, conjunction, interjection, and all that. And so accordingly, the lessons are prepared, and grammar provides the rules for putting words together, and instruction often focus on the form and inflection of words, especially the inflection of words, because English is a language what we call inflectional language somewhere. Though in modern English we do not have lots of inflection, but somehow what is happening, we look at the kind of memorization of irregular words are memorized or drilled. Just maybe in a grammar book also, whichever the grammar book, Ray Martin's or grammar book, or whichever the grammar book you have followed, you will see that let's say there are verbs which are regular verbs, and there are verbs which are irregular verbs for that matter. So the irregular verbs will have to be memorized. You see, so we know that the verbs, the past tense form of the verbs. So by adding ed, so we know that these are regular verbs, and irregular verbs are those, let's say, like many verbs for that matter. Run, ran, and bring, brought. So these verbs have to be memorized, and the teacher will tell you that yes, you have to memorize all that. So and not only that, even talking about the plural also, the plural formation rules, as simple as that. They will say that add s or es, and there are some noun, let's say whether it's man, men, louse, lies, mouse, mice, all that kind of, deer, deer. These have to be memorized, and the kind of drilling practices are going on, and what happens, very again, not only interesting but at the same time frustrating also. So what they do, the teacher will employ a certain kind of classical text, reading of difficult classical text to began early, and so the text which we do not have any link or the kind of relation in our contemporary world for that matter. So let's say in an English classroom, a text from Shakespeare is being introduced, and that there is no link, and the kind of Shakespeare in English which were there in the 16th or 17th century, and there are many forms, old and archaic forms are used there, and so teachers are introducing those classical texts, and so their one understanding is that whether you are building comprehension, and main understanding is that whether you are able to understand or comprehend the classical text or not. You see, so this is where so the kind of drills practices, and if you look at these drills practices, and these are basically disconnected sentences from the target language, and there is no link. If you look at the something like the context and its uses also, why I am kind of memorizing those things and all. So students cannot question, but so language were somehow taken out of the context, you see, and at times we do not understand, the text as well, and as I already told you that little or no attention is given to pronunciation. The spoken part is like it's missing basically. So your whatever kind of, whether you are efficient or you are not efficient, is totally depending on your written test, not the spoken pronunciation and other part. So the goal of this approach is definitely not achieving native or near native like pronunciation. No, it's mainly talking about the grammatical level, and so whether you understand the grammatical things or not, whether you are able to translate or not, and okay, so and some kind of things, maybe in your childhood days, not only childhood days, in your school days, you must have translation of a literary passage. So maybe you must have translated something from a literary passage. So translating sentences from target language into native language begins early, and proficiency of this is considered as learning of the language. So we have done it many times, and you must have also done it. Let's say there is a literary passage is given in the target language, so your job is to translate that in your mother tongue, or whichever the contact language here. And on the other hand, both translation from this way to that way also. Maybe a text in the mother tongue is given, your job is to translate that into English. and this kind of translation, I think still it is going on. If you look at it in different even examination also, in West Bengal there is a School Service Commission. I see that the kind of translation, from Bangla to English, English to Bangla, and not only that, maybe you also see that in your state level also, the kind of translation maybe from Hindi to English or English to Hindi is given, you see. And other thing is the reading comprehension question, and still it is there. So the capability of finding simple information in a given passage in the target language and making inferences. The comprehension thing still it's being used. So a text is given, text or maybe a paragraph is given. So you're whether you can understand or not, depending on that. So there are some questions, and you have to make inferences. And whether you are good or bad, your proficiency level will be tested, and looking at the comprehension text and all, And for your vocabulary, the words, whether you know the words or not, so they may test whether you know the synonyms of that word, whether you know the antonyms or not, So some word is given, so what is the antonym of that word? What is the synonym of this word? So all that kind of things, they do it, especially, and so main thing, as I told you, that the memorization thing, so a lot of depends on the capacity to memorize a vocabulary list, grammatical rules, and also the paradigms, the kind of inflectional paradigms, I was talking about, and use words in sentences. They do use. So the teacher will say that, this is the word, let's say, run. So asking the student or the learner, make a sentence with the word run, or the word horse, make a sentence with the word horse, use words in sentence, memorization, deductive application of rules. So what is this deductive application of rules? Mainly, whatever the theoretical understanding you have, depending on that, you are making certain kind of exercises, and whether it is the fill in the blanks or some other kind of exceptional and things and all. So based on that, students will be tested, you see. The fill in the blanks is one type mainly. So still fill in the blanks is being tested, and I think in your examination also, the kind of entrance examination, or maybe at times you will see that in UGC NET also, the fill in the blank type questions are given, you see. And so deductive application of rules are often been tested. And one of the interesting thing about grammar translation method is also, you will see that the composition, or essay writing, composition or essay writing. So one of the higher levels of proficiency. So if you're trying to test the higher level of proficiency, so what they will do, so so especially in the target language, you are tested whether you are able to write a passage or not, in a particular given topic. So, and especially in JNU also, our language teachers, many language teachers, they do. If you're talking about whichever the language, Korean, Japanese, Chinese, and all, so there is essay writing competition will go, and in university-wise, at times in different university-wise, essay writing competition also. And let's say JNU and DU, Aligarh Muslim University, and other places, students, they're also taking part in the essay writing competition and all, So it's also good to some extent, you see. So the test your ability, whether you can write a passage or not, you see. So so these are some of the things, or the kind of features of grammar translation method I told you. And I think most of you, I do not know most of you, but at least I think in the class, as I can see that 28 or almost 30 people have joined. So roughly, my guess would be that at least maybe 13 or 14 of you must have been trained, or let's say been taught by this grammar translation method, or the kind of grammar things I'm talking about, you see. Or maybe some people, those who have got that opportunity, that the teacher were speaking English, and that kind of setting, got communicative language teaching approach, if you must have got it, so you're very lucky for that matter, you see. So there are many people. So anyway, so think about your own experience, so how you are being taught the second language, so whichever the second language, whether it's English, French, Spanish, German, Russian, Chinese, whichever the language for that matter. So I talked about the key features of grammar translation method. What are the key features? How teachers, especially in the class, they adopt this method, and so now talking about this grammar translation method, and I was telling you that people are there to criticize, and you will have to understand that, whether you are good or bad, people are always there to criticize you, So even grammar translation method, whether it is good or bad, there will be critic of that, So advantages are there, disadvantages there in every path for that matter, you see. And so grammar translation method, it has its own some advantages or some disadvantages as well. So let's see what are the disadvantages of this grammar translation method, and we'll talk about the advantages of grammar translation method as well. So both the pros and cons, you see. So what are these disadvantages, or what kind of critique of this grammar translation method? So we know that the grammar translation method does not emphasize on the basic skills like listening and speaking. So you remember that, I think one class we are talking about, if you are talking about language, at least the 4 essential thing, especially in the second language teaching, you have LRSW. So listening, reading, speaking, and writing. So the 4 basic skills we talk about. We always talk about 4 basic skills, listening, reading, speaking, and writing. So somehow, grammar translation method, you will see that listening and speaking are not given emphasis, and also the communication. It's not only speaking. So we'll talk about in a more elaborate manner, advanced manner. We talk about communication. Speaking is different, and it's a higher level, let's say, communication. So communication is not given emphasis for that matter. And try to look at this. We are talking about grammar translation method. You're translating the grammar from one language to another language, and first of all, it is not looking at the spoken language, but for that matter, try to understand. You're trying to translate important aspect of spoken language. Trying to translate spoken language, like the pronunciation, articulation, intonation, pauses, speech, and etc. from one language to another language. Can you do that? Yes, maybe to some extent you can translate the grammatical rules from one language to another language. But if you talk about the spoken part, the pronunciation part, let's say, how do you translate the articulation part, intonation part, the pauses, because every language has a different kind of pause and the pitch pattern for that matter, you see. And so one of the simple drawback, and talking about the translation itself, I must have mentioned that translation is a kind of Herculean task. It's very, very difficult, and it is very difficult to translate from one language to another language. And in initial case, you are translating, you yourself do not know the language, let's say, the target language here, and you are trying to translate. That means your translation is not a good translation for that matter. Anyway, so there are many aspects of language which are not easily translatable, whether you talk about idioms, phrases, there are different phrases, cliches, there are many proverbs for that matter. You cannot translate from one language to another language, because each language has its own kind of typical characteristics. Some culturally loaded things are there. Every language has its own kind of characteristics. Let's say English, for that matter, if you're talking about English uses preposition. On the other hand, let's say Indian languages, most of the Indian languages, they use postpositions, let's say. So many languages, for that matter, they do use article, and many languages, let's say, they do not use article. The concept of article is not there. And the culturally loaded terms, there are many culturally loaded terms. Let's say in Indian scenario, something like bindi. Bindi, the women, they use this bindi or sindoor for that matter. If you try to translate in English, not exactly, because these are some of the culturally loaded terms related to food items for that matter. I just we had try to understand this, and let's say the word soup, 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 and you're trying to translate soup in Indian language, whichever the Indian language. Can you translate soup? If you have kind of equivalent word, please tell me. Just maybe you can write simply text in the chat box, and soup, SOUP. I'm sure it will be very difficult for you to translate soup, whichever the languages you speak, mainly talking about the Indian context, you see. So, and as a result, the translation into mother tongues affects the originality of the words. And so what is happening, the kind of translation which is kadha, Sumit saying kadha, but is it actually soup? That has to be looked at.
It's kadha, not kadha.
What's a kadha? So you're talking about kadha, but
Yes, sir, it's kadha.
I understand, but jhol, not exactly. Jhol is totally different, and even kadha, if you're talking about, no, it's not exactly. Soup, you have a different kind of. So even this Corona period, many people are having this, kadha. As you said, and soup has a different kind of things. Talking about the English or European setting. So it's basically it is eaten before milk, before the meal, and this is not. And jhol, Bengali jhol is basically machar jhol and mangsha jhol and all that jhol curry kind of things. So it's very difficult, try to understand this, and you yourself understand this. It's very difficult, Anyway. So curry, dal, you cannot say dal also. It's a different. It's not exactly dal, you see, and dal is different, So what I'm saying is that translation, we're talking about grammar translation method, and so there are many aspects of translation from one language to another language. It's very, very difficult task, Herculean task, and so I just mentioned about idioms, some phrases, some cliches, and there are many words. I can provide a list of words. So where you will find, and also I had interesting one article related to this game rhymes, and was doing this. Was delivering a lecture in JNU alumni in 2016, and then carried out a survey and. And in the survey, so people are asked to translate some songs, not really songs, some game rhymes, and let's say one of the game rhymes was Akkar bakkar bambe bo 80-90 pure 100 samay mila dhaga chor nikal ke bhaga. And this is one of the rhyme was there, and I can tell you that even if you know Hindi or English both, it's very difficult, or something like so there are many. Let's say the lullaby for that matter, soja munna soja lal palang pe soja mummy papa aayenge dher khilona laenge. So this is another. So let's say if you translate in English, maybe in Hindi, start singing this, the children will definitely sleep. But let's say if you start singing this, if I translated it in English and start singing it, and I think the child will not sleep, rather the child will cry, looking at or listening your translated version and all, you see. So every language has its own kind of characteristics, whether you talk about the lullabies and the kind of idioms and the phrases, the culturally many heavy loaded words, as I mentioned, you see. So just 1 second, let me just come back. Let me just have it. glass of water. I'll be back soon. Okay, just 1 second. Excuse me. Okay, sorry for this inconvenience. Anyway, so I was talking about there are many aspects, of translation. So there are many things are lost in the translation as well. Anyway, so we'll have one class, and especially in this aspect, because in the unit also it is given that. The translation thing, we'll talk about that part. Okay. So and now, what I am saying that translation into mother tongues affects the originality of the words. Also, let's see if you're translating from English to whichever the native language or the mother tongue, it also affects the to some extent the sense and beauty of the words. Sense and beauty of the words. Let's say soup, as I was telling about soup, and soup is being translated either as jhol in Bangla, because jhol has a different kind of connotation, and kadha, as you said, and it has also different kind of connotation. And also if you translate dal or something like that, so it affects the sense and beauty of the words, whichever the word. Just I'm giving one example to some extent. Shorba, shorba is also has a different kind of connotation in my understanding, you see. And so it's not equivalent, because two culture, and so because English culture is different culture and your culture is different culture, so you may not find the real equivalent word for that matter. You see, there are many equivalent you will find, because we are all humans, but talking about the culturally loaded words, heavy loaded words to some extent, it's not easy to find. So, and one thing about this grammar translation method is that it is also teacher oriented and one-sided method. And students do not get opportunities to participate in the discussion. So it's mainly teacher oriented. The way teacher wants to design the class, it's okay. It is totally one-sided approach, you see. And other thing, since mother tongue or the contact language is being employed here, so it prevents the learners to think directly in the target language. The target language, whichever it's English or French and all. So because there is lots of interference is there in the mother tongue, you see. So first the mother tongue come, and then the target language, English, So as a result, what is happening? No direct bond between thoughts and expressions. So people say that there are no direct bond between the thoughts and the expression, because as if like you are speaking English, but you are thinking in your mother tongue, and then you are speaking. So as a result, the thought and expression, there is a slow process kind of going on. So that's what one of the kind of. People criticize this thing as well, you see. And it's also the kind of report after serving many people, they say that translation method, the grammar translation method, often creates frustration for the students, and it lots of frustration for the students, the kind of memorization, the kind of drills we talked about, you see, and the kind of, let's say, the classical text are being introduced. And let's say you have done this English language teaching course, and even after 6 months, you're not able to speak, and as a result, it creates lots of frustration for the students or for the learners, for that matter. Okay, and on the other hand, it makes few demands on teacher, and but there is no talking about the demands for on teachers, only less demand on teachers. Teachers are like, some syllabus is there, syllabus is given to the students, and then whether students learn or not, it totally depends on the students, you see. And other drawback, and really interesting, and why it is, because it's teaching the language, basically rules to teach the language, making whatever the rules, the grammatical rules, and they are abandoning the uses, the whole uses, the performance, for that matter, the whole communication, for that matter, and we know that there are many grammatical rules in English which are no more in use. The kind of English, let's say, it's me, it's I. So people will say that in the prescriptive tradition, they'll say that it is basically, it is I. But in general, if you look at all of us, let's say, whether it's the speakers of British English or American English, we do use it is me. Who is this? It's me. And let's say we do use this. So they will say that, yeah, it's the wrong sentence. And also the kind of prescriptive rules, you remember I discussed in one of the classes that, never end a sentence with a preposition, and we had seen that in real life, there are many sentences we do end with a preposition. So they will say that it's the wrong. So, and you'll fail it, let's say, because the teacher is judging it, and so you'll be failed, So something like, so the rules to teach the language, and also you are being tested, your proficiency is being measured, so and it's also talking about, many people say that the grammar translation method is not suitable also psychologically and linguistically, because the kind of thing I was talking about, the kind of direct bond between thoughts and expression, because there is always a kind of interference, mother language interference is going on. As a result, people are having the kind of slow kind of speech, and also talking about the kind of the target is only to some extent the grammatical rules, and only target part of the human information, and it's not the whole language, for that matter, you see. And the pragmatics aspect or the uses of language is not taken into account, and so only few things are being taken into account, and they are teaching the language, So language is multi-sensory, for that matter. It's not only one aspect, So as a result, so these are some of the critiques. People they criticize grammar translation method, and one can also claim that the relationship between language and mind, and language and society, for that matter, is not considered to be a point of reference for teaching here. So relationship between language and society, the kind of sociolinguistics I'm talking about, the kind of language in use I'm talking about, the performance factors I'm talking about, and also relationship between language and mind also, So that is also not taken into account in grammar translation method. So you must have heard about this person, and it's a famous phonetician, professor. Phonetician Henry Sweet, you must have heard about, Sweet, and so this Henry Sweet, and so George Bernard Shaw, you must have seen that movie, My Fair Lady, and there's a character, Professor Henry Higgins, and the Professor Henry Higgins is the character is basically that, but it's somehow George Bernard Shaw were very much influenced by Professor Henry Sweet, and if you seen the movie My Fair Lady, if you haven't seen, but please do see that movie, and My Fair Lady is really interesting. You'll see that how different different methods were employed, grammar translation method, audiolingual method, and other things are also employed, they are, and really interesting, So one of the phonetician, Professor Henry Sweet, so he is like a leading opponent of grammar translation language teaching, and he says that it's a described grammar translation method. It's a bag into which grammar and vocabulary are crammed without regard to meaning. So grammar and vocabulary are crammed without regard to meaning, and that's exactly the case. If you look at, so grammar and vocabulary is there, but there is no meaning for that matter. Meaning is given in isolation, totally in isolation. And if you look at meaning to some extent, and meaning is not necessarily in the word. Meaning is there are many things. It's contextual, and I talk about these things, especially in discourse analysis, in pragmatics also, and there are many cases. So if you go by the linguistic structure, the linguistic rules and all, the meaning is somewhere else, not necessarily there. So Professor Henry Sweet, kind of leading opponent of grammar translation language teaching, he says that a bag into which grammar and vocabulary are crammed without regard to meaning. So meaning is mainly talking about the meaning part, because they're teaching meaning in isolation for that matter, you see. And what I'm saying is that this My Fair Lady, please do watch My Fair Lady, and you will see that somehow the character Eliza Doolittle, I think, yes, that's the character Eliza Doolittle. So when she got the training and all, she could speak English, the kind of royal English we are talking about, and but at times she is not aware of the kind of the context, and she spoke certain words, and she is not aware of what should be what is the context and all, and people were just looking at with that, though she is looking good because she has she wore all that kind of dresses. Initially she was speaking very good English, refined English, the way she is being taught, but the other contextual factors she was not aware of, you see, and people are just simply looking at her. Oh, anyway, so really interesting, so that's the part. So the pragmatics so is not taken into account, especially if you're talking about grammar translation method, you see. So the use of the mother tongue will only hinder the acquisition of the target language. So too much, use of mother tongue, as a result, acquisition of the target language, the hindrance is going on, and yet most of the teachers resort to it in some way or another. So most of the teachers, let's say, they resort this grammar translation method. Okay, so these are some of the critiques and the limitations, the kind of limitations, as I already told you that, so now let's say, so there are lots of limitations. We do have the kind of critiques we had seen, and somehow we look at this, the people who are trained in grammar translation method, and the learners could hardly negotiate a normal communicative encounter in the language learned. So got training in more than 1 year or 2 years, and not able to communicate properly in the target language, and it has happened, you see. And even if you talk about the critic part, it's also left very little to the imagination of the teacher. The teacher who is following this grammar translation method, so even he cannot do much thing, and let's say he tries to be imaginative, or tries to explore things, but tries to follow grammar translation method. So there is very little left to the imagination of the teacher as well. And most of the time in grammar translation method, the learner is largely passive, in the process of learning. Mostly passive, it's not active, you see. Largely passive in the process of learning, and was most likely bored in the classroom. So they're bored in the classroom. So the learner, they're bored in the classroom. And there is very little space for organizing constructive and creative learning around challenging activities, constructive or challenging activities. If we're talking about, there's very little space, and okay. So, and too much obsession with correctness, as I told you, the kind of prescriptive traditions. They're following that kind of prescriptive traditions and too much obsession with correctness. And even at times, the rhetorical devices used in the classical texts. So people are saying that you need to use that kind of rhetorical devices also in your speech. But in reality, many people, they may not use those rhetorical devices, you see. So because you are being trained by in that manner, in that fashion and all. So anyway, so there are lots of critics and the kind of limitations we do have in grammar translation method. And but what are the good things, and in grammar translation method? And that's what I say, that try to get something good, whether it's from a person or from a method or from a theory, not necessarily the bad things, and people mainly try to get the bad things from some people, you see. So there are some people, they're very aggressive, volatile, or arrogant, egoist, so people try to develop that kind of things. Yeah, I have to be arrogant, egoist and all, so yeah, even the person is arrogant or egoist or something, maybe in that person there are some good characteristics. So try to get the good characteristics from the person, so even talking about this grammar translation method, let's say, so what are the best thing, what are the good things we can get, from grammar translation method, though it has its own limitations and the kind of shortcomings for that matter. So one of the things we had seen that, especially grammar translation method, it begins with grammar translation. So the people especially develops an art for translation, art of translation. So people, let's see, want to be a very good translator and all. So definitely develops an art of translation. Understanding of the words become better and quicker. So the way that the words you have learned, the kind of, we talked about, we question the words are learned in isolation. That's okay. The context was not there, but somehow understanding of the words become better and quicker because you are to some extent trying to compare it with your mother tongue, and also in your memory. Strong memory is created. So let's say the word soup, I was trying to explain the word soup, and let's say to some extent you try to understand that what is the soup, and then the kind of exercises you have carried out. So easily you can understand that, oh, soup is something like this, but not necessarily like this. It has a different kind of connotation. So you remember, easily. So understanding of the words become better and quicker. Okay, so the use of mother tongues helps the learners in vocabulary setting, grammar, and sentence formation as well, and it saves time in compared to other methods. Also, if you talk about, it saves time, and even for the teacher you were talking about, this method is very useful for overcrowded classes. Overcrowded classes, let's see. Other methods of language teaching are employed, and what is happening there, you will see that other methods of language teaching are employed, and the teacher has to do many things, let's say, and we'll talk about that. But if it is overcrowded class, so it is one of the best methods to tackle many students, or whether it's 100, 200 or 300 students, very easy. But if you're following other methods of language teaching, it's not easy to handle the students, So there are some advantages of this method as well. And I think I already told you that the kind of relevance of this method, still grammar translation method is resurfacing or keeps on coming in different third world countries, and not only third world countries, in different parts of the globe, and in many places. Once I was talking to one professor in Russia, so we were discussing these things and all these language teaching methods and all. She herself, she is saying, oh, what about those communicative methods and reading methods and others? Grammar translation is one of the best methods, and so that Professor Koklova from Russia. So we had a long discussion and all, and so that's what. So it's the relevance, So the grammar translation method is still used for the study of languages that are very much alive and require competence not only in terms of reading writing and structure, but also speaking, listening, and interactive communication as well. And that's what if we are talking about. And later on, Stephen Krashen is giving too much emphasis on reading or reading method. And as a result, let's say you are being given lots of literature, lots of unfamiliar text, and as a result, your comprehension level and other levels are also increasing, slowly and gradually, and so this has survived for a long time alongside a host of more modern methods, and grammar translation methods. If you compare other methods, let's say audiolingual method, a direct method, or immersion method, there are many methods, let's say, but many methods did not survive many years. But somehow this method has survived and surfaced again and again, and so many people fluently learned it largely through a grammar translation method. And we had seen that also, that many people in the third world countries, even in the developed nations also, you see that they have fluently learned the language, you see, whichever the target language, and the grammar translation method were employed by the teachers in the school and the curriculum also, and even in schools, if you talk about India, the grammar translation method is introduced, and think about computer assisted language learning. I was talking about CAL, we talk about CAL, and can you understand that? Can we employ this computer assisted language learning in Indian context or Indian scenario? I afraid, because where think about it, this Corona period and all. So mostly in the rural places, it's more than a year. Schools and colleges are, let's say, maybe here it is happening in India, especially JNU and other many premier institute, they are taking classes, but in many places it's not happening. Maybe teachers are taking classes, but students are not. It's not because students they do not want to join classes, but because of the infrastructure and other problems, and I have, let's say, contact with many students as well as teachers. They have this problems, and whether it's internet connectivity, whether it is infrastructure level problem. So there are family, let's say, they have only one mobile phone or one laptop, and there are many families that do not have laptop, one mobile phone, and there are 2 or 3 brothers or sisters, cousins are there. So the class timing is kind of matching or mismatch. So what clashing with other teachers and all, so what you are going to do? So one brother or sister has to miss the class. There are many practical problems, internet connectivity, financial things and all. So the computer assisted language learning is being employed. So do you think it's possible? I don't think it's possible. So maybe for those elite, those who can afford, and still they're let's say university, like there are many private universities, it is compulsory for them, for the students mainly, that you have to switch on your video. If the students are, let's say, switching somehow because of some problems, the video is not switched on, so teacher may mark that particular student as absent, But in our case, let's say, I hardly will say that whether it's you switch on your video or audio, it's totally up to you. And the problems are there, the internet connectivity and different problems are there. See, so what I'm saying, that if you are employing computer assisted language learning and whole methods of assessment through this video conferencing and something, it's very difficult for that matter, you see. And so we'll have to look at India in a different manner, you see. And so the grammar translation method keeps on surfacing or resurfacing again and again, and it should be noted that methods of teaching language do not emerge in a socio-historical and epistemological vacuum. And try to understand that the kind of grammar translation method we talk about, so it did not emerge in a one day. So there is a kind of socio-historical and epistemological kind of environment over there, you see. And why is this so? Grammar translation method, the classical method of language learning, that's what we are saying, that the trend, if you look at, that was the time people were learning the classical languages, mainly the classical languages, whether it's Sanskrit and or the dominating languages for that matter. Okay. The languages to some extent where the better job prospect or the opportunities were there, you see. So so all these things, the kind of practical things, so they are generally a response to certain social needs and often get located in contemporary linguistic and psychological theories. So whatever the socio historical background, epistemological, the kind of understanding we had, so and slowly and gradually the grammar translation method came into picture, and that is the scholarship of mostly the German scholarship, as I told you. And so the beginnings of the grammar translation method are located in the teaching and translation of the classical Greek, Latin or Sanskrit text, mainly the classical languages, as I told you. And it is still, though it is being criticized, but it's not yet been completely replaced or abolished, and it's still being practiced in different parts of the globe. And the grammar translation method, if you look at, has been used and continues to be used extensively in the teaching of second language in schools, in different schools. And with the grammar translation method, the teacher is not expected to have good communication skills as well. Even see other thing, try to understand that. Let's say you are teaching English and you want to employ a British teacher or American teacher, and let's say the kind of salary will have to give to that British or an American. Let's say you have opened a school in Bihar or in Bengal or in Jharkhand. You do not have a person who will be teaching American English. So somewhere, so the teacher, let's say lack of teachers also. So even teacher is not expected to have a good communicative skills. Even then, you can run your school, or even then you can run your colleges or something, So, and it's been going on. Look at in different places and different coaching centers and all. I was telling you, one day, this is in. So what happened? A person he got a job. He's a school teacher. So he's qualified to teach class 10 plus 2. He went to the school to join in that school, and the principal of the school said that, okay, so you came with a joining letter, and the joining letter is printed, and there is a proper format. So please do not use that format. Why don't you write an application in your own handwriting, and please do not follow this whatever the pro forma the template is there. So write a simple application, blank sheet of paper. So the teacher who was supposed to join, he said that, sir, today I'm not going to join. I'll come back tomorrow. So try to understand that the teacher who were supposed to teach English language or literature, he doesn't know how to write a simple application, a joining letter. He said that, sir, I'll come back tomorrow. But he has to think about that, okay? I have to write the application, which line and all. Maybe you have to consult someone else as well. So that is the apathy, let's say. And so I'm not name shaming someone or this teacher or that teacher, So, but it's the reality. You just look at, here and there. And so teacher is not expected to have a good communicative skills as well. And you want to employ those good teachers, you have to pay a whole lot of lump sum. And many foreigners, whether it's British or Americans, will they come to India and settle in India, and the kind of salary you will give them? I don't think so, And whichever the second language we are talking about, whether it's Chinese, Japanese, and other things as well, you see. So, and a really interesting thing, and why this grammar translation method keeps on resurfacing. The real understanding is that, especially in linguistics, and not only in linguistics, and we also had seen that to some extent it is really successful grammar translation method, and why is it? Because I'll tell you some of the cases, and even in the classroom, if you employ this grammar translation method, uh, there is a kind of a amicable environment can be created, and even the social tolerance level can be enriched. Why is this so? Let's say you are a teacher, and there is a um, language literature classroom, and so you give text in English, or maybe a short poem in English, and you ask those or tell those students to translate those that short poem or short text in their mother tongue. So that short poem is translated in their mother tongues. Or let's say another phenomena I can say that talking about the plural rules in English, and how the plural rules are and happening in their mother tongue. So if you ask the children, so they'll try to do in their language, and even let's say the short story or short poem. So the children, they can explain to a whole thing in the class. You see that, okay, this is in my mother tongue, this is something like this and that. So the kind of social tolerance level can be enriched, you see, because in India we had seen that the multilingual classroom, as I told you, see the multilingual classroom, as I told you, and from very beginning the children, they have that kind of analytical abilities. So analytical abilities are sharpened. So you have a text, that text is being translated in the mother tongue, and other person is also doing this thing. So there is a sharing and caring kind of attitude, you see. So analytic abilities are sharpened. Children acquire the process of scientific inquiry of data collection also. So they are trying to understand that what is happening, how to collect data. So from very early stage, you see, try to classify it accordingly. The kind of categorization can also take place, you see, and also the rule formation, so, and cognitive capacity to some extent is also enhanced. Children are very good, the kind of talking about the memory and all. So the short poem, which is whether it's twinkle twinkle little star, shall I wonder what you are, if you tell them to translate in their mother tongue, and they'll do it, and there can be a discussion, among the children as well. So that's kind of social tolerance level, it can be also enriched. So there are many things, good things are there, and so think about in a different manner. So you have to be very dynamic even as a teacher also. So as I already told you, that there is not a single method of language teaching which can guarantee that you can learn the language in a better or effective manner. So if you are a really good teacher, you have to mixed methods, and you need to employ different kind of techniques, especially if you're talking about second language teaching. Okay, so this is briefly in grammar translation method. I have discussed these things in extensively, grammar translation method, almost 2 hours, today. And please do read chapter 4 briefly, though it is mentioned, in that book, only I think 1 or 2 pages, but at least you will have understanding of what I discussed today in the class, you see. And so the chapter 4 mainly some methods of language teaching, so the direct method, communicative language teaching methods are all there. So please do read chapter 4 from Guy Cook. And so next few classes will have this language teaching methods and approaches and techniques, what kind of techniques is employed. So